Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Amanda Marcotte, and my guest today is Rick Wilson. He is a longtime Republican strategist and the author of Everything Trump Touches Dies. A Republican strategist gets real about the worst president ever. Welcome to Salon Talks, Rick.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
So the title of your book is Everything Trump Touches Dies, which is hilarious. But you're a proud conservative and have been a Republican for a long time. And I have to point out, Trump is enacting the full slate of Republican agenda items, slashing regulations, packing the courts with conservatives, cutting taxes for the rich. So what exactly are your objections to him?
Well, look, let's go backward in this list. First off, the tax bill that was passed was to the benefit of about 150 to 180 hedge fund guys on Wall Street. As an actual conservative, I believe that crony capitalism is a bad thing. And that bill was the apotheosis of crony capitalism in this country. I've never seen anything even close to it in my 30 years in American politics. The bill was designed, in fact, for friends of mine wrote it, as 85% of the benefits going to 150 some people. So I'm sorry, I find that to be a non-conservative outcome. I do believe in lower taxes. I do believe in a tax structure that's flat and pretty even, and it doesn't punish innovation, and that doesn't punish risk taking. But this is not that bill. This is something completely different. Donald Trump's regulatory rollbacks are ephemeral. They are things that are going to be undone by another person with a pen and a phone down the line. So I think the people that are triumphal about them are largely misplaced. And I actually happen to come from a sort of older generation of Republicans where, from that Teddy Roosevelt school of Republicans who actually believe in conservation. And a lot of the things he's done on the environmental front, I think some of those rollbacks were not things that were holding the entire American economy back, but were instead, again, crony capitalism to prop up a dead industry that technology had passed by, to wit, coal. So, look, my conservatism may be of a more elder school and Burkean flavor, but Donald Trump is not a conservative. He is a statist, and he's a wannabe authoritarian. And so I don't have a lot of trouble, going after some of the policy things that he's going after, because I don't think they're actually conservative.
Well, what about packing the courts with judges like Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, look, both Kavanaugh and Gorsuch didn't come from Donald Trump. They came from the Federalist Society, and they came from the fact that right now Mitch McConnell has a majority. Any president plays that game, and both sides have played that through in the past. When Clinton was president, he certainly raced to get his folks on the bench, and so every president does it. But I think in a lot of the cases of the judges that have been named, they're not outside of the mainstream of conservative legal thought. I'm just thankful that Trump hasn't named any of his crazy associates or people that he thinks he knows, rather than folks who come from the sort of the broader Republican and conservative schools of jurisprudence.
So in this book, you really point to every level of the Republican Party, from leaders to donors to conservative organizations to the voters themselves, as complicit in creating the path to Trump being president. Tell me more about how this was a system failure on all fronts.
Well, it's a leadership failure in the beginning. And the leadership failure comes in two massive areas of the GOP. First is the party structure and the party leadership itself. You didn't see Reince Priebus have the forethought to recognize what Trump would mean to the ticket, what Trump would mean to the party overall, what Trump would mean to the conservative movement. All those things were just sort of left behind. The leadership thought, we're going to let this guy play it out. Otherwise, he'll jump out of the race and run as an independent, and he'll screw us with these populist voters. The second big tier of failure was all the money folks who, both sides have their pools of money. And in this case, you had the pools of money divided between all these Republican candidates in the primary field. And so a lot of the wealthy donors said things like, well, I'm with Jeb, but I'm going to wait till Trump takes out Marco. Or I'm with Marco, but I'm going to wait till Trump takes out Cruz. And all these things sort of accrued in this chain of bad decisions. A friend of mine is an Air Force guy one time expressed to me, he said, every plane crash starts a couple days before. And this started a long while before. It also started because the party built up a dependence on a singular media ecosystem built around Fox and talk radio, and trained our voters to distrust all other sources of information. So we essentially built a fourth branch of government, which I don't think is a very conservative outcome, in the form of Roger Ailes, the house that Roger built, and we ended up with this moment where Trump was able to, this conflation of terrible decision making all came together in one fell swoop.
Well, and you were a Republican strategist since the 80s. You've been in campaign politics and in government, as a Republican since then. Do you think you played a part in this kind of system failure?
Absolutely, and I say so in the book. You know what? The base of each party is intense. The base of each party has certain desires and needs, and both sides develop tools to stoke those people and to get them revved up and to get them fired up and to get them afraid or angry or motivated. And I take full responsibility. I certainly ran any number of ads saying that Nancy Pelosi was coming to take your guns away, and I wasn't out on the edge case. I wasn't one of the edge case guys. It wasn't, my ads were never like Nancy Pelosi will make you get gay Sharia married, all that stuff. But we learned how to push people, and we pushed them, and then Trump stole the toolbox.
And I think that's really interesting because you kind of characterize Trump in this book as somebody who's hijacked the party of Ronald Reagan. But I would point out Ronald Reagan played a lot of these games too. He started his campaign in a place where civil rights workers were murdered and gave a speech about states' rights. I mean, I think we all understand the implications there. He used language like young bucks and welfare queens. His aide Lee Atwater straight up said that the strategy
but let me correct the historical record a little bit, though. But that was the same Ronald Reagan who went to CPAC after the Klan had endorsed him and denounced them in one of the most fiery speeches you've ever seen. He was the same guy who said there's a big place in this party for everybody except for the bigots and the racists and the haters and the anti-Semites. So there's nothing like, Donald Trump is sui generis when it comes to racial dog whistling in this country. It's more like a racial air raid siren every day. And before Trump, there was never an ability for those groups of really horrifying people to use social media to legitimate their message with a lot of people, to intrude their message into mainstream conservatism in a way that is way outside of the normal bounds of individual liberty, limited government, rule of law, personal responsibility, all those things. It really is a very different flavor now. It's this amped up on technology, and it's very dangerous.
I definitely agree with you. I mean, especially today when we're recording this interview, Donald Trump has been tweeting out literal white supremacist propaganda gotten from, VDare and places like that. So we're in a totally new territory. But I guess my question is, while Reagan would say out of one side of his mouth these things about tolerance and overcoming racial bigotry, on the other side of his mouth, he would do things like start his campaign where 3 civil rights workers were murdered. So don't you think that this sort of lengthy, 40 years of using the Southern strategy kind of led to Donald Trump?
Well, I don't actually, because look, you look at the history of George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, and of Ronald Reagan, our 3 recent Republicans. I mean, George W. Bush, set aside all the other stuff from the war and all that, this was a guy who was aggressively working to bring Hispanic and African American voters into the GOP. This was a guy who didn't have a scintilla of racial animus in his body. George H.W. Bush, when I was working in the Bush administration, and under Lee Atwater as our chairman, we got deployed to go down to Louisiana to kick the crap out of David Duke when he ran for office by a Republican president and a Republican party run by Lee Atwater and George H.W. Bush. These were not people that played into the. And look, there's a bit of the Southern strategy that is a cliche, and a bit of it that's sort of ahistorical. I really recommend people read The Rise of the Southern Republican by Merle and Earl Black, which it acknowledges there are elements of that in the 74 race. Or 72 race, excuse me, but that a lot of the change in the South to republicanism had to do with a whole portfolio of factors that were transcended race. And look, it's a fascinating question. We could probably talk about social strategy for a day, but Trump has broken what was the Republican Party, which was based on a series of principles in broad agreement on limiting the size of government, controlling taxation and debt and budgets, making sure that individual liberties, as outlined in the Constitution, were held aloft and revered, adhering to the rule of law, having dignity as in the office. All these things. There's a departure that's so radical from Republican presidents and Democratic presidents that I really think when I say that this is the party of Trump now, it is a shrunken party. It is a withered party. But the core that's left, they are Republicans, but they are Trump Republicans first, and they're not conservatives in the traditional, broadly understood, Burkean sense.
So you worked for Rudy Giuliani, both in government and on the campaign trail. What do you make of your old boss's current role running defense for Trump?
Who knows? Rudy doesn't talk to. I'm part of a big alumni network of people. There's a lot of us who work for Rudy there are guys that go back to '89 in his very, very first race. And I came in '97, so sort of in the middle. But there's a big alumni network, and none of us can figure this thing out. Everyone is just baffled and horrified. Because look, whether you loved Rudy or hated Rudy as mayor, he helped turn the city around, bring business back to the city, clean up neighborhoods, improve the quality of life, help the crime rate drop dramatically, help the economy enormously. And agree or disagree with Rudy, on 9/11, he provided a single moment of clarity and moral leadership for the whole country that was necessary in that horrifying moment. Those things could have been a legacy that would have put him in the history books forever. And my biggest fear is that Rudy has accepted some sort of deal with Trump that, like everyone else who comes around Trump, it looks great on the front end and it turns into something that destroys your career, your life, your reputation, and your standing. So it's a mystery. I wish I could explain it.
Well, and that kind of gets to something you write about in the book. You say a lot of the people in the Republican Party right now and the leadership on the Hill, they secretly loathe Trump and that they're opportunists and cowards. I mean, is this like speculation on your part, or are you actually hearing this from people?
This is absolutely. Look, I have become this father confessor to a lot of these guys. It's weird because they're even like people who weren't my clients. Now, like, I got your number from so-and-so. Can we talk about something? I'm like, sure. And all of these folks, in the House, I'd say there are maybe 40 or 50 guys who are real Trumpers, like the Jackass Caucus. They're like the honest to God, Trump-tastic, red hat wearing, yeehaw. There are a group of opportunists who are playing this for all that it's worth, trying to get something out of Trumpism, the Ted Cruz's of the world, who are trying to manipulate the Trump voters into thinking I am the natural successor to the big man. But most of them are just scared, Amanda. They're just terrified of it. I mean, and I tell the story. A member of Congress who's a friend of mine, right after Trump was elected, had a town hall meeting. And the guy peps up and asks him, are you going to vote with Mr. Trump 100% of the time? And he said, well, I'd like to vote with him on things we can agree on, like lower taxes, and that he's a Republican. But then he answered the question the wrong way for the Trumpers. He said, I represent this district, and if the president says something that I don't want in this district or isn't good for our people, I'm going to vote against it. And I wish he'd stop tweeting. By the time he got off the stage, his Facebook page and his children's Facebook page and his wife's employer's Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds were filled up with threats and insults and things like if you want to raise your children, you better get on with Mr. Trump. They'd be sad growing up without a daddy. This crazy talk out there that Trump has normalized and regularized in our culture, our political culture, is enormously dangerous. There's always been a kind of political homeostasis in this country where the right doesn't hold too much power for too long and the left doesn't hold too much power for too long. It's a big, messy, squishy mass in the middle. And so Democrats aren't, enamored of every single thing that Bill Clinton did, like welfare reform, for example. And Republicans aren't enamored of everything George W. Bush did, Medicare Part D, for example. But this big sort of consensus relies on two parties that basically treat each other in good faith. Trump's party treats everyone who isn't a worshiper of Donald Trump as an enemy of the state. And that's where we're at right now. I think it's in very dangerous waters because, if we're going to have a country where there are people with varying views on big issues, and we are, we vary in this country. It's a big, messy place. If those people can't talk because the Trump voters are holding, everyone else hostage, you have to obey Trump or die. We're not in a republic or a democracy at that point. We're in something much different, darker, and I think quite dangerous.
So we have time for one last question, and I have to ask you, Trump won't last forever. Especially after this week, the chance that he gets out of office before 2020 just went up, but he could be out in 2020 or, God forbid, in 8 years. One way or another, he's out eventually. How does the Republican Party form in the way that you feel they should? How do they pick up the pieces after all this?
Well, we don't really use the word purge much in American political parlance, but if the Republican Party wants to survive after Trump, they're going to have to purge out the racist assholes like, Richard Spencer and David Duke and all these other guys. And anybody who runs for an office on the Nazi ticket or the Klan or whatever, the Republican parties need to reform their own rules so that those people can be immediately removed from the ballot. This is not something we can afford as a party ever. We have to get off this conspiracy crack that the party's been on for several years now. And, frankly, and look, I was one of the first Republican consultants in 2008 to say, I had my researcher make 3 phone calls to Hawaii, and this birther stuff is bullshit. It's crap. We have to get away from that immediately because right now the whole party is infused with QAnon and birtherism part 2 and all these crazy, beliefs that George Soros secretly runs the universe from his pyramid under the Alps, all this crazy stuff. That's not for a political party. That's for a 4chan message board. And we've got to get back to being a party that isn't built around crony capitalism. It isn't built around taking care of our friends just because they donated money to the campaign. I know that's a shock to people, but we've become built around this whole principle of not conservative governance, but of get what we can get while we can. And I think that is a deadly long-term strategy because venality is the downfall time and again. We've seen it over and over in elections in this country that greed and corruption are killer apps to blow people out of office and blow parties out of power.
Well, thank you, Rick. My guest today has been Rick Wilson. The book is called Everything Trump Touches Dies, a Republican Strategist Gets Real About the Worst President Ever. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it. Have fun.